Uncle Dan.
Hello.
Longtime listeners of this show will know that we try to be ecumenical in our scorn and make funningness of other religions.
A, what does ecumenical mean? And B, we have longtime listeners? This is great.
Welcome to the second episode.
They actually use our podcast to keep people awake in Gitmo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's cruel but fair.
But there is
Muhammad, how's it going, dude? We'll get you out of there soon.
There's one religion that because it pretty much runs everything in this state, we make fun of more than any other.
Yeah. Also, it tortured us for years of our lives.
Also
so
that.
It had it coming.
Yeah.
And that is the Episcopalians.
That's
Boom.
right. God damn you people.
Yeah. So I can't believe I'm going to say what I'm about to say, guys, but there's something happening in Mormonism.
Whoa.
I know. As much as we have and will talk about Mormonism and its fascinating beliefs and history, where plenty, almost too much shit has happened, it's now quite famous for trying to make things not happen at all. It is so profoundly resistant to change, it's a wonder Mormons ever change their socks.
Yeah.
And resistance to change is the hallmark of any conservative institution, which, once it acquires the status, position, and material goods it desires, stands athwart history yelling "stop," to ever so slightly paraphrase the odious William F. Buckley.
Yeah.
Modern Mormonism is ossified. It is a fossil, like the men who lead it, and that is very much by design. And I'm sure that most any man or woman on the street anywhere in the world who knew just about anything about the subject would tell you Mormonism is a very conservative institution. But that hasn't always really been the case.
True.
Like many early American utopian spiritual movements it shares DNA with, it was fairly radical at its inception, with wild ideas like interplanetary pre- and post-mortal existence, direct revelation for all male priesthood holders, an early form of communism, polygamy, etc., and that Joseph Smith raised what was an enormous private army called the Nauvoo Legion, which made authorities at every level of government pretty itchy. Mormonism became even more radical after the death of Joseph Smith in a gunfight and brawl in 1844, when Brigham Young, opting to leave the hated United States and build a theocratic empire in the mountains of what was then Mexico, Young later greedily rubbed his hands as he watched the Civil War raging, hoping both sides would fuck each other up so much that the Mormons could go back out and take over what was left.
Yeah.
And as many listeners already know, Mormonism, though these days wishing to appear like an advertisement for Leave It to Beaver, has an extremely violent DNA. For the receipts on that, you can read John Krakauer's excellent Under the Banner of Heaven, or go to our webpage and just search the word Mormonism. Mormons have felt entitled to use violence, sometimes on a horrifying scale, looking at you, Mountain Meadows Massacre, to defend what they even today feel is a besieged faith. And there is a certain conditioning to respond to criticism, even mild criticism, with an absurd level of overreaction. And while for all of its history that we've experienced, guys, for me that's almost a quarter of its existence, which is weird to think about.
Wow. You are old.
I'm old. It is spoken with a single, tightly controlled voice, has it not?
Yep.
Yeah. It is as top-down an organization as one will ever find on this flat earth. But it has experienced schisms of a type a few times. And this is playing off your episode. I think it was last week or the week before, Dan, on Thank God I'm Atheist.
Oh, yeah.
Were you and Frank kind of puzzled if there was some sort of schism maybe brewing in the church?
It's possible. Yeah.
Yeah. So just in Joseph Smith's lifetime, several disaffected members, once his closest confidants, left or were excommunicated, some hanging out prophetic shingles of their own. Upon his death, the church skizzed again, with Brigham Young seizing the keys to the kingdom from Joseph's young son, Joseph III, and his first wife, Emma.
That was the biggest of the schisms.
That was kind of the grand mal skiz.
They skizzed hard then.
Yeah, his majority became the Mormons we know today, Young's majority, while Joe III and Emma's branch became the RLDS and the Community of Christ out in Missouri, right?
Yep.
Another schism occurred in 1890, when in a bid to gain American statehood for Utah, Brigham Young's successor, Wilford Woodruff, had a, quote, revelation that the absolutely critical sacrament of polygamy would no longer be practiced on this side of the veil, only in the afterlife. This caused
he himself actually reneged on a couple times, marrying some other people to new wives, and which he had promised he would never do.
Exactly. He'd sworn to the United States. And this caused a fairly seismic fracturing of the church, with most of its with some of its conservative diehard members splitting off to form more righteous polygamous sects, while mainstream well-to-do Mormons like Wilford Woodruff practice it secretly a few inches over both the Mexican and Canadian borders.
Right.
Long story short, that's where Mitt Romney comes to us from. Far more recently, when Mormonism was under intense pressure from society at large, and BYU was under threat of being boycotted by other NCAA college sports teams for the church's inexcusable stance on the inferiority of black people and their ability to advance in the church, Prophet Spencer W. Kimball had a very timely revelation that black people were all good now. Mm-hmm. Of course, no apology or explanation of any kind was offered, but a small number of saintly racists broke with the downtown church and set off for more regressive shores. But 1978 is ancient history, fellas. And other than that little blip on the radar, the last 100 years of Mormonism has been pretty much monolithic in tone, voice, and theology. We grew up with the phrase from the primary song, "Follow the prophet," right? It's a commandment. As we've discussed before on the show, the Mormon prophet is the unquestionable and singular spokesman for God on earth. What he says is immediately gospel and canon for the most part. It's essentially the same for the other leadership that surrounds him. In the Mormonism we grew up in, questioning or criticizing the prophet or general authorities, or even just your lowly neighborhood bishop for that matter, was pretty much unimaginable. It just wasn't done.
Like literally every month there was a meeting. The major meeting of church was just people getting up and swearing on all that they had that they would basically do anything for the prophet.
And they didn't question the Joseph Smith or the prophet or anything in any way.
No. Right. They know that it's true. It's like that's the rote thing that
they
you
don't
say.
believe.
I know
they
this
know.
church is true.
Yeah. So here we are today in 2020. Well, the church hasn't changed.
The best year.
The best every year. Well, 2020 might make us look back with some fondness. I don't know. 2021. While the church hasn't changed a hell of a lot in 100 years, the world sure as fuck has. The current prophet of the church, Russell M. Nelson, was born in 1924, the same year George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue and Al Jolson's California Here I Come were the top-selling wax cylinders, and the first ever Winter Olympics were held with everyone using wooden skis. And I'm sure Russell M. Nelson would find those things disturbingly modern. And this man, basically half as old as his 200-year-old church, is in charge of it in the wonders and horrors of the information age. Doug talked about the nature of these men of the candlestick phone age leading the church in a 5G world, and how they will always be 100 years behind the times in episode 77. I just listened to that again. It's a very good segment.
Well, thank you.
The radicalism of old-timey Mormonism is hidden away with so many of the rest of its skeletons. The institution, as I mentioned earlier, is very conservative at this point, socially and very much so politically. Before he was the Mormon prophet in the 1980s and the 1990s, Ezra Taft Benson had been in Eisenhower's cabinet at the height of the Cold War, where he fell under the sway of the most radically conservative movements in the country, including the John Birch Society. He was already friends with a guy named Cleon Skousen, who was a lunatic that we'll talk about another time.
Right.
But Ezra Taft Benson believed the protocols of the Elders of Zion, a salacious and insidious forgery we discussed in episode 49, was real. It is not. And he believed that the Jews were controlling black people worldwide to advance communism. Under his leadership, before
That's
and after
double,
becoming...
by the way. He gets double points for that one.
Yeah, he was the whole package. Under his leadership, before and after becoming prophet, Mormonism went from reflexively conservative to decidedly right-wing.
Yeah.
And as such, it has dealt with the teensy little flare-ups of occasional whispers of progressive ideas or people within its ranks harshly.
Yeah.
In recent years, there have been high-profile excommunications and squashings. One was a group of progressive scholars who became known as the September 6. We can talk about them another time.
Yeah, and, of which my mom was almost one.
Your mom was almost September 7, right?
Yeah, exactly. She narrowly escaped, I think.
Good for her. She's good thing she has those fast feet.
Yeah.
And more recently, progressive activists in the Mormon sphere, like the therapist and podcaster John DeLynn, just for asking people to share their experiences. Feminist activist Kate Kelly for the blasphemous audacity of her ordained women movement. A guy called Sam Young, who had the temerity to suggest that Mormon bishops should not be asking minors sexually explicit questions in one-on-one settings. Of course, Jeremy Runnels, who at his grandfather's request wrote a list of questions for a church education system authority to answer, better known as the CES letter, which Doug covered in episode 141. A list of questions, by the way, to which he never got an answer. That's going to matter in a second.
I mean, not getting an answer was his answer.
What's that?
Not getting an answer was his answer.
Yeah, they just never answered. It's been years. So the church has done a fine job of pounding down any murmurings on its left flank. But what about its right flank? Well, the church itself is the right flank of the church normally. In sane times, being to the right of institutional Mormonism would knock you right off the edge of the chessboard. But not anymore. In this here digital age with Al Gore's internet, something kind of shocking to those of us who keep an eye on Temple Square is going on. And that is, there is something to the right of Mormonism within Mormonism, and it's looking kind of out of control.
Yeah.
Lots of struggling Mormons and ex-Mormons, like any other community, find each other online to try to figure out how to live life after leaving such a high-demand religion. But don't worry, there's an army of trolls waiting to send them threatening imagery and make vague death threats generally. The 501st Mom's Basement Division of Keyboard Commandos, known as Deseret Nation, is there to make sure any post-Mormon conversations online are properly peppered with images of infamous Mormon assassin Porter Rockwell and Bowie knives, with language about decapitation, etc.
Jesus.
Known as #Desnat online, these are maybe too faithful, hyper-conservative Mormons so secure in their belief they feel the need to harass and threaten anyone who doesn't believe exactly as they do.
I mean, you say too faithful, but I think you're going to get to them being not as faithful as we might assume.
Well, they're faithful to the Mormonism they've constructed in their minds, right?
Sure.
So why the Bowie knife image? Because during a talk in the Salt Lake Tabernacle, Brigham Young once unsheathed his Bowie knife and laid it on the podium, threatening to murder all the apostates within the sound of his voice. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
A group of Mormon intellectuals of some kind have just released a manifesto claiming their radical orthodoxy is a center lane between the church's more liberalizing and conservative forces. I don't know if you guys saw that article in the Trib, but...
You know, I saw it. I literally have it open on my desktop. I just haven't read it yet.
Well, when you read what they're talking about and their ideas, it's just them freelancing in an attempt to pull the church all the way to the right and drown out progressive voices. They're hardly a center lane, right?
Well, it's so amazing. They say that they're center, and literally what they're centering themselves between is like moderate conservatism and the most extreme conservatism you can imagine.
Yeah.
And they're calling that center. It really is kind of insane.
It is insane, and they obviously don't understand, how you divide up things geometrically if they think that's the center. It's very...
They don't think that, right?
You can't call yourself orthodox and also the middle.
Yeah, radical orthodoxy. So
they're moving the Overton window, right? That's what they're doing.
Totally. And again, they're kind of doing this outside of church leadership, right?
Right.
So recently the leadership of the church did two things that were unthinkable to its most conservative members. An apostle encouraged wearing masks as a way to love our neighbors and protect each other. And the official church social media accounts, this was just last week, congratulated Joe Biden and Kamala Harris on their victory and expressed eagerness to work with the incoming administration. Well, very online right-wing Mormons went, berserk.
Really?
Berserk. It seems being deeply embedded in one cult makes you vulnerable to others. The influence of right-wing Mormonism, the cult of Trump, and QAnon The confluence of those three things, made itself very apparent in the fugue of all caps and misspelled outrage that followed these announcements from the official church. People said they were either immediately or considering leaving the church over it forever, and questioning the prophet's sanity.
Like, I cannot. I keep thinking I can't be shocked, and then the world keeps fucking shocking me.
Yeah. For non-Mormon listeners, it's impossible to overstate how falling in line is the greatest commandment in Mormonism.
Yeah.
Like, you don't. This is not done, right?
No. In fact, if you were to, in the inner sanctum of a typical church meeting, which is not a place for strangers, if you were to express the mildest doubt, the mildest concern about the position of a prophet or apostle, it would be, scratched record.
Yeah.
It's just not done.
Yeah, and they're questioning Nelson's sanity. Well, maybe he's too old. Maybe he's gone, he's soft in the head.
That's amazing.
And much more insulting, crazy stuff, right? So it's just not done. So institutional Mormonism itself is also not innocent in this shit-lording lurch to the right. There's a quasi-official church nonprofit apologetics operation called Fair Mormon, right? And we've talked about them before.
Yeah, they've appeared on this here podcast.
Yeah, and it's a sad fucking thing. It's a sad corner of the internet, right?
Yeah.
They have the loathsome task of trying to explain away the boatloads of problems in Mormon scripture and history that the official church can no longer keep concealed.
I think you mean submarine loads, but go ahead.
Yeah, I do mean submarine loads. Fair Mormon has but despite being, bullshit, it has typically been a pretty dry, unexciting, non-combative outlet for misinformation and little white lies, right? Until now. They've hired a group of YouTube comments made flesh to make apologetics videos to appeal to, well, it's not really clear to whom. They are, in a word, terrible. Yeah. They are seethingly vicious, unfunny, and so bursting with logical fallacies, lies, goalpost moving, and misdirects, you start to feel like Lucy and Ethel at the chocolate factory, just trying to focus on one or two canards at a time, right?
Right. They
claim Jeremy Runnels' CES letter is so stupid and full of lies that nobody with half a brain would even bother mentioning it. So unimportant, in fact, that they made 11 highly deceptive videos trying to refute it.
Right.
There was a great article in the Salt Lake Tribune featuring about these videos, featuring interviews with several Mormon academics and writers, really mourning how awful the videos are. These are Mormons, wondering who in the hell this mean-spirited playground taunting is even meant to convince of anything. Now, as we've mentioned before on the show, the CES letter that they say doesn't matter at all, only to make 11 videos about it, is very much an existential threat to the church, as we have a source very close to the top-tier leadership, and I mean the top-tier leadership, right, that says they are panicked about it. And lest we forget, these trolls at Fair Mormon only have to produce this mean girl garbage because 7 years after the fact, the Church Education Service has still not answered Jeremy Runnels' questions from his letter. So the task has been outsourced to some shitty, unfunny Provo all-stars on YouTube. One of that group retweeted one of the aforementioned Bowie knife memes from some Desnat shitlord, which included the scene from Inglourious Bastards with the names of Jeremy Runnels and post-Mormon podcaster John DeLynn superimposed over the heads of the Nazis, and the name of one of the kids in the Fair Mormon videos over the guy who kills the Nazis with a baseball bat.
Right.
Jesus.
This has resulted in a flood of death threats to both Jeremy and John, who have had to contact the police and the FBI. On their webpage, to their credit, Fair Mormon, while denying that they had anything to do with the threatening memes and death threats, they take full responsibility for everything in the videos and say that is 100% their content. And they also clearly renounced the Desnat shit and death threats of any kind. So good for them.
Yeah, well, congratulations. You did the least you could do.
I was about to say, you did the least you could do.
But it is the least they could do. But as far as I can tell, that one statement on that webpage, Fair Mormon, is the only effort I can find anywhere that any branch of the church has come out against the seething, freelancing violence threatening right flank of their membership. Nowhere else have I found any evidence to get this under control. Church leadership has nuked even the most timid voices of progress on its left, all the while totally ignoring the infiltration of conspiratorial thinking and a sizable movement into Trump-inspired fascism on the right. Some of that is surely due to its own rightward impulses, of course. The church is very conservative. But I think some of it is due to its aging leadership not having a clue how online communities grow and metastasize, how fast misinformation can spread, and then having no idea how to respond to a crisis they don't even understand.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. Like the best thing they've come up with in the last year, in the last several years, is a hashtag.
Yeah.
They made everybody do, a week's worth of give thanks hashtag.
Yeah, just retweeting.
That was their big gambit.
Yep. So to my mind, a lot of this started when they failed to do anything about Glenn Beck, when he was a rising star of bullshit at Fox News in the mid-2000s. As a former drinker with a drug problem, this Mormon convert was one of the most high-profile Mormons in the world. His nightly broadcasts were a blizzard of conspiracy theories, falsehoods, racism leaning heavily on the Jew hatred, and other assorted madness. Mormons have always been vulnerable to conspiratorial thinking. I mean, it's a religion that has convinced itself the world is out to get them. They store 2 years of food in their basements. But Beck gave white Mormon men big media permission to drink unashamedly from the fire hose connected to the most insane corners of the tinfoil-wrapped right-wing mind. Because Mormons normally revere and almost worship their authorities, a call from Thomas S. Monson asking Beck to be more moderate, to slow down on the fugues of racism and lies, etc., could have been hugely effective in calming down his bullshit. But that never happened. It seems the church was happy to have such a media star in its ranks, regardless of what insidious puke he was dumping into the airwaves.
Well, half of them probably believed the same shit.
Totally. So part of the very public face of Mormonism right now is rageful, vicious, and possibly dangerous online and offline presence. The church either cannot, or maybe even worse, does not want to get it under control. But as the reaction to the mask suggestion and the bow to the reality of the Biden-Harris win show, there may be a sizable chunk of the membership that is done with the facade of niceness and respectability the church has so carefully constructed for decades.
Yeah.
It may be they'll refuse to be shushed, even if the church were to get around to doing it. But in any case, it seems like a major crisis they have absolutely no tools for handling, since punching hippies and feminists and spying on queer kids at BYU are the only tools in their box. So I don't know, that's kind of the gist of it. I've never seen a more kind of careening, uncontrolled conflagration within Mormonism in my lifetime.
Well, and it needs to be said too that the activity of these kids, leaving aside all of the many things we've documented on this show about Mormon misconduct, throughout the ages, towards black people, towards women, towards wagon trains, towards gay people, that Mormon youth are supposed to be like pious and have good manners and not swear, and it's just that activity alone of
Mormon
these internet
young
trolls.
men all the way up into adulthood are really supposed to live by the Boy Scout oath, right?
Yeah, exactly. But so just these kids alone being this way and not having it kind of being clamped down on by even their parents.
Well, they're not children, right? These are
Early
guys
20s,
in their
I assume.
20s, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not that the parents don't have some kind of sway, I would think, at this point. Certainly their ecclesiastical leaders do, their bishops, their stake presidents.
Sure.
But I do think,
and Fair Mormon is an official Mormon enterprise.
Yep.
And it pays for these videos. It's paying them to do this.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Trying to imagine the conversation of someone in the Mormon marketing department trying to explain to the apostles what an internet troll is,
right?
And how you go about fighting one. it's like speaking a different language to these people.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do think you're right, Mark. It reminds me also of Sarah Palin, where they have given life to something that they can no longer control. And whether they can or can't, or want to or don't, they're not.
You know, it essentially, a lot of this could be fixed with one conference talk. You know what I mean? Like one apostle or the prophet gets up and says, enough. This is not how we behave.
That's how I would assume that was right in any other time.
Yeah.
But I don't know that that's true anymore. It used to be that if the prophet, well, it used to be that that an official communication from the church was it. Now I see equivocation every single time where people are like, well, this didn't come directly from the prophet, so it doesn't count. Or this wasn't signed and dated by the first presidency of the church, so it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
But I'm starting to think that even if the prophet himself got up during General Conference over the pulpit, which is technically supposed to be the be-all and the end-all of Mormon theology,
Yeah.
and said, God himself has told me, you guys need to get with the program, I think he's lost him. I don't think he has the juice
I think he'd
for
lose
it.
a sizable chunk.
Well, here's what I think they're terrified of. What if he did do that and they just said no?
Yeah, that's what I think is happening.
Yeah. And I think the church is, they have been bleeding youthful members for, 2 decades.
And part of the reason they're bleeding youthful members is because of this hippie punching, right? They're just, any progressive movement on their left flank, they just annihilate, right? And so kids are like, well, fuck that. I have gay friends. I'm not going to put up with this. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now, the movement they tried to put together, because they did, this was an effort on the part of the church to try and, do some hip young YouTubing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it has gone in a very dark direction. And
It's so snide. I don't know that we've
It's vicious. It's really
you
vicious.
don't understand. Mormons are supposed to be the nicest people. When the you mentioned that the Salt Lake Tribune, Mark, did an article about these videos, and the woman who wrote the article, I'm Facebook friends with, and she put it out there. She said, What do you think about the Mormon Church attempting to use humor to bring people in? And I was like, I think they should try it.
Yeah.
Because this
What
snide, mean, evil bullshit isn't working.
Yeah. And,
Well,
it's typical of any kind of right-wing comedy is, look, we, every week we're three kind of chumps with no real comedy background who try to find the funny shit in some pretty terrible material. And comedy is, good comedy is it's a creative act. It's an act of empathy. It's an act of understanding other people. And it's also self-deprecating, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And there's just none of that.
It's you got to know, the comedians who are getting in trouble these days, who are getting canceled or whatever. I'm not talking about the ones who, molested people or whatever.
Yeah.
But the people who are getting canceled are the ones who don't understand where punching up and punching down goes.
that's the thing, is punching down is almost never funny.
It's never fun.
Right.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's the thing.
That's
all
these
this
guys
is.
are doing.
Yeah.
And I think punching, an official church outlet punching down at Jeremy Runnels, who is one of the nicest fucking people ever, right? Who approached the CES letter with great earnestness, not as a shitlord, right? He wasn't being a troll. And he's just a regular guy. He's just a nobody. And this, 11 videos just attacking his character and his person is despicable.
Yeah. Well, and let's be clear, too. As you mentioned before, Fair Mormon used to be more of an intellectual or even at least faux academic enterprise.
Yeah.
An attempt at intellectual.
Exactly.
Anyway.
But they would try and...
That was its veneer, yeah.
Right. This is not that. This is these people. They pretend to be kind of it's stylized almost like a Daily Show or a Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, it's kind of Weekend Update,
and it's and they're so it's a lot of asides and a lot of setups to the punchline, and it is utterly devoid of actual content. It's very snarky, it's very mean spirited, and I definitely come from a perspective here, but it's not fucking funny.
Yeah.
No, that's the greatest sin of all.
It's
For my
incredibly
taste.
unfunny.
You could get away to me with like not having much substance, which they don't have, if you were funny. But the fact that it is so profoundly unfunny and humorless, and they just leaned on means to me that's the greatest.
Well, for instance, they say they say the CES letter is stupid, it's unimportant, it doesn't matter, you shouldn't even consider it. And then I would say a huge percentage of Mormons under 30 have read it, right?
Yeah.
A huge percentage. And then they turn around and say, well, anybody who's stupid enough to read this letter deserves what they get.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, who are you appealing to? What's like,
yeah.
And that's the other thing when you're making content like that is, who is your audience?
Right.
Who are you speaking to? And it just, they don't seem to have any idea who they're trying to talk to.
Well, and
I think they do. And it's Trump cultists. It's the same people who respond to the meanness of Donald Trump.
Right.
Well,
But
here's what
they're speaking to the choir, right?
I think that's right, though. I think they're not. It's like what the Mormon mission has become over time. The Mormon mission is no longer trying to get recruits. The Mormon mission is a radicalizing experience for those who go on it.
Exactly.
And that's what I think these guys are doing, is they're not trying to, they're not trying to stem the bleeding. They're not trying to recruit people who might have left or are thinking of leaving. They're trying to radicalize what's left.
That is probably, if there is a conscious understanding of what they're doing, which again is arguable.
Which there isn't.
That's probably it.
Yep.
So
all right.
Anyway, the days of the smiling Osmonds are gone, you guys. Replaced with a sneer.
Yep.
All right. Well, we'll sneer our way off then.
Bye.